Next up, we have Alena Coons. Alena is currently a doctoral student in the East-West Psychology, or doctoral candidate in the East-West Psychology program at CIIS. Her dissertation explores the worldviews of urban farmers from an ecopsychology perspective. Alena holds a master's degree in counseling psychology, a certificate in horticultural therapy, and she is a Master Composter. She will be offering an academic course on urban farming this coming summer. Her talk today is called Reimagining Tzedek. I did my research, I promise. Talking Justice on a Jewish Urban Farm. Please welcome Alena Coons.
This one, yes. Yeah, okay. Hello. Honored to be here. So today I'm speaking about a word called Tzedek.
Louder.
Come closer into the mic.
Today I'm speaking about a word that's called Tzedek. This is a Hebrew word. And I'm speaking about it in the context of a Jewish urban farm. So right now I am doing my dissertation using ethnography and interviews to work with urban farmers on a Jewish urban farm in Berkeley that is called Urban Adamah. Adamah means earth or land in Hebrew. So I just want to point out that my background is in as a psychologist and as a horticultural therapist and an ecopsychologist. And I'm drawing upon contemporary Jewish scholars, mostly rabbis, for my understanding of the Hebrew words, but I do not personally know Hebrew. My study overall is based on trying to understand how the people who come to work on an urban farm view the world. I'm asking, what is it about these folks that makes them interested in being urban farmers? How do they understand their spirituality? How do they view sustainability? And how do they understand justice issues? Because reciprocity is a really important value that I hold in my research, I decided to offer my own skills in farming as a way that I could offer something back to this community. And so I spent a lot of time farming as part of this project, which has been amazing. So just a little view into the life of an urban farmer here. I know the text is very small, don't worry, I'll read it. This is a view of my calendar one day. The green part just says UA, which is Urban Adamah, so that was the day that I was planning to spend working on the urban farm. And at 3 p.m. you can see I had to make a note, where is the straw? Because we had misplaced our straw for our animals, and it was part of my job to go and figure out where the straw was. Also, later that evening, I was teaching a group of children about the goats on the farm. So it's just always funny for me to reflect on this because, you know, farmers in rural settings get up and do their work, but farmers in an urban setting have to kind of merge these worlds and be able to schedule things. And you know, if you go to Urban Adamah, there are people out working with the gardens, but there's an equal amount of work to be done in public relations, in data entry. I mean, there's so much work that really spans kind of our urban and our rural lifestyles. A little bit more about the farm here. You can see in the upper left there are these kind of structures. There's a yurt here, and we have on the upper right corner, that's an image of one of our gardening beds. In the center are two of our goats. That's actually my main work right now, is working with the goats. I teach people how to milk the goats and how to trim their hooves and other aspects of care. I also teach people about how livestock fit into the system, the ecology of an urban farm. And we also have our chickens down in the lower left. And in the lower right, you can see the welcome sign, and you can see a little bit of the Jewish influence, as the welcome sign includes both Hebrew and English greetings. This is the mural that you would see walking into the farm. You can see that there's some Hebrew words on it. It depicts scenes of biblical imagery. And you can see that there's the parting of the sea in the middle, which I will return to that idea at the end of my talk. So this image really shows that the traditions in Judaism are really based on agriculture, and a lot of the celebrations, the holidays, a lot of the belief systems are rooted in agricultural tradition. This is some signage we have that informs people about one of the major purposes of the farm. In addition to offering a lot of educational programming, like children's field trips, summer camps, Hebrew school, workshops about farming for adults. That's kind of the educational piece of the farm. But additionally, we offer a free farm stand every week. So anyone who identifies themselves as being in need of food can come and collect our produce. And almost 100% of the produce grown goes to whoever shows up. And this is something where I've, in the past, was really involved. Again, right now I've moved towards working with the goats, but this is kind of the main focus that I'm going to be referring to today, is the farm stand and how that ties into social justice, and how that is critiqued by the participants in my study, the farmers who I'm working with, because there's kind of some upsides and some downsides to this approach to doing justice work. And really, whether or not it even is justice work is regularly called into question. Okay, so in order to understand Tzedek, we really need to differentiate these two different concepts that are two different Hebrew words, tzedaka and tzedek. So looking at the left-hand side, tzedaka translates into charity or giving. And this is a pretty common translation. Several different, or most authors of texts that discuss this concept, as well as the participants in my study wall, usually refer to tzedaka as charity. At the same time, there's also a real resistance to this being the end of the definition. It's kind of like the definition needs to continue, because there's a problem of translation into English. Whereas charity in our culture can sometimes mean going above and beyond what is expected. In Jewish tradition, this is absolutely mandatory. It's a given. You don't get any special recognition for doing tzedakah. It's like your obligation. Of course you do that. Also, there is an implication of fairness in the word tzedakah, because the root of tzedakah is tzedek, which means justice. And so there's there's a little piece of tzedeka that is not only about giving, it's about giving for the sake of making the world a more fair place. So one thing I noticed from the social research perspective was that my participants were really able to describe tzedeka for me when I would ask. They would say, that means giving 10% of your income to charitable causes, or that means donating a certain amount of your time for volunteering. They could give me examples of what it actually meant to do tzedeka. On the other hand, tzedek, people were able to define as justice, but they struggled with really going beyond that. It was difficult for people to think of examples of what tzedek meant. What is justice? You kind of get to that one word and then people fall short in their answers. Most authors that write about tzedek will agree on the definition that tzedek means justice. However, there's very little space given in the text for discussion of this. So sometimes authors will just write, that tzedek means justice, and then that's it, and they go on to describe tzedeka, and that could take pages and pages in a book. So likewise, the participants are not able to give those definitions or examples. So, so the trend here is that people, that the practice of tzedeka is really well fleshed out in Jewish tradition, and tzedek is kind of more mysterious. But tzedek is also one of the core values that the organization of Urban Adamah claims to hold very dear. And so this has created a lot of tension among the farmers at Urban Adamah because it's unclear what the work of justice really is. So there's a lot of disagreement and there's a lot of kind of angst and complaining about what is the work we're doing? Is it good enough? Is it truly justice? Or is the work we're doing actually going to have an impact? And this is a really big concern for the people doing this work. So to understand tzedeka and tzedek a little more thoroughly, I looked at the history of how these ideas played out in Jewish tradition. Historically, tzedeka is based on an agrarian practice of always having a surplus amount of food that would be shared. So this always meant giving a portion of one's harvest to public servants. It's kind of think of like a taxation system where, if we all give into something for the common good, then we're able to maintain services and people whose jobs it is to serve the community. There's also this concept of peah. Peah means corner in Hebrew. And there's a Jewish agrarian law that says you're not to harvest the corner of your field. You have to leave the corner of your field unharvested. And anyone who needs that food should be allowed to come and take that. There's also a law about gleaning, very similar to peah, but when you go through and do a harvest, some of the foods won't be entirely ripe, or you might have forgotten to pick a couple foods here and there. So a lot of times farmers will go back and look for those, what got left behind. And in Jewish law, you're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to leave, just to harvest your field one time, and then whatever is left over should be for anyone who needs it. So how this plays out in the long term is that there is a 50-year cycle of Jubilee. And what that means is that the families who have gone into any kind of debt or who have lost their land are able to have their land restored to them. So between the practice of giving and the 50-year restoration of land to one's family, no one stays in chronic poverty. It doesn't mean that the world is perfect. but there is kind of a cleansing moment where people who have lost some of their means of sustaining themselves get a second, or a chance over and over again throughout history. Of course, we don't know if this played out as ideally as it sounds, but the laws are there that would dictate that this is how it should happen. If we compare this to Tzedek, we can think of Tzedek as something that is achieved through the practice of tzedeka. Tzedek isn't really a practice in itself. It's more like the laws of tzedeka, when they're followed, allow the society to have tzedek, to have justice. And the main aspects that create tzedek, again, are the Jubilee cycle that allows people to have their land back after it's been lost. This looks like a confusing diagram. It's not, I promise. If you look at the left, it's just an example of how tzedeka would look in an insular community. So at the top you have your resources, and some of those are just always going to public servants. The resources, there's also those a role for people who need help and assistance, and that is kind of like the example of Peah, the corner of the field. Over time, though, those people who need help will have their land restored to them. Then they'll be able to transition into the role of helper. They'll be able to not just take care of themselves, but have their land back so they can even produce Peah for someone else. And actually in Jewish thought, it's not only a good thing to be a helper, it's your right to be a helper. It's a human right to be able to help others. And if we think about that as the standard for what justice is, I think that's transformative. On the right-hand side, again, sorry, it looks complicated, but it's really not. It's just the way that tzedeka plays out in our context now in the US. It isn't an ideal society, it isn't insular. There is the role of the helper, so that would be someone who's giving, let's say, financial resources as an act of tzedeka in kind of a modern way that this is done. And you can see on the bottom right, some of these will go back into the Jewish community. So like funding a Jewish community center would benefit something within that community. On the upper right-hand side, you could also look at some of these resources going to charitable causes. And that's a little difficult to discern whether or not those resources will be used in a way that's effective or ineffective. So in some cases, these are going to be, inefficient and may not be able to solve the more complex problems of justice. And of course, some of those funds could be used really well by organizations. So this is where the question of tzedek comes in, because tzedek, what people are realizing, what these farmers are realizing, is that tzedeka is not enough. That in our context, in a society that is not insular, in a society that is diverse and very large, and also especially in the US, a society founded on exploitation of people and land, that we need something more. And so the word tzedek is becoming a space for disagreeing, dialoguing. It's becoming a space to create something new. And that's why people are so agitated around it. So basically there are two ways to look at justice in terms of tzedek. One is as a final state, an ideal, the way things should be, the way things maybe were in some kind of very small community. Tzedek could also be defined as systemic change. This would be a recognition that the traditional methods of maintaining fairness aren't enough anymore. And there's a need for different strategies. So tzedeka is one of them, but also political and social activism. This way, the systemic change definition of tzedek really acknowledges the diversity of the world that these farmers are living in. So finally, I'll just leave with a commentary on a commentary on a commentary, which is Jewish tradition embodied. There is a rabbi, Telushkin, or I'm sorry, a rabbi, my bad, I will come back to that. So this rabbi gives a commentary on the sage in the 15th century, Nashon ben Amindav. And this sage is talking about the story in the Bible of the Israelites arriving at the Red Sea. So the Israelites are fleeing from slavery. They arrive at the Red Sea. They don't know what to do. The sage comments and says, well, they have four options. They could either return to slavery, they could stay and fight, they could commit mass suicide, or they could pray. Being religious people, they prayed. And God responds, why do you cry out to me? So the sage says, well, obviously, prayer was the wrong answer. So what was the right answer? The right answer was go forth into the sea. Just go into the sea. And I love this as an image for how we can approach social justice issues, because the problems that we face are as enormous as the sea, and we don't know what we're doing, and it's scary, and all we can do is have a little bit of faith. And so the next time you feel overwhelmed by the gravity of the situations that we're dealing with, remember, go forth into the sea. That's the right answer. Thank you so much.